I have us at 10 o'clock, and in keeping with our practice, we're going to try to do a firm start time. It also, in just acknowledgement, I know we have more people that will have to be here online. I understand our constituency often has to work on Sunday morning. So we know where you are, and whatever way you're able to join. Again, we were saying these are streaming live. For those who might be interested, we have recorded. I'm going to keep them archivally available for a little bit, but we're going to pull them after a couple of weeks because of various copyright needs. So you can go back and review parts that you might have missed. And we also have those who are left from our panel. We all got jobs. In fact, faculty, remember we have a faculty meeting at 10 o'clock Monday. So 24 hours, tick-tock. And I know students have papers and other things like that, but a lot of our panelists who've been so generous with the time with one another and with their time to take to work on these pieces. I actually really want to open with that particular word of thank you. I am acutely aware of the stresses and busyness and pressures of an academic job. And I know how hard it is to carve out time to think and to write, and to have so many of you who took that time and gave us the gift of that time and attention it's beyond flattering. And I promise we will try to be as gracious in our honoring of your gift as we can. So we're, long way to say, going to be a little different than we've been so far, and then we're going to be kind of sharp at our stop time today because folks need to get on the road. I've got everybody welcome back. You're all on your honor to help me police as more people come in. We're trying to keep everybody to the center so that we can approximate a circle for conversation. And our format's going to be wildly freeform. We're going to just have a conversation together. I'm about to open up to the room, or to the panelists, to say, what have you seen, thought, heard, discovered, wondered? Do you have a question for a colleague? Was there somebody you wanted to say something publicly to, an accolade, anything that's come up? And then we're going to gradually move out to the rest of the room for that. And then Catherine has some remarks and thoughts about kind of pulling it together. I've got wildly free-form thoughts about something that I've discovered. And that'll be where we end up. So I do the PhD coursework colloquy, a gathering of the students that are in coursework to come together for like an hour a week and just commiserate, strategize, talk. And we often have what they now lovingly, I'm sure, refer to as story time with Grandpa Dean. So this is a little bit of story time with Grandpa Dean. We're actually on a rug, so it works even better. So with that, I think there's a microphone in the audience to circulate. So we'll be getting that ready. Let me open up to our panelists and now all friends.
So I'm not completely sure who on the panel is a graduate of Drew. So who is a graduate of Drew on the panel? So I think Drew has acquitted itself incredibly well based on the folks that have participated. Good job.
So anyone, you learned, discovered, a word you want to make public, a reflection you've had, a question that's still apocalyptically gnawing at you? Anything? John?
I don't know what it means, but I just felt a sense of urgency about the topic, the timeliness of our work. I'm glad that we have a schedule that seems pretty speedy to get this out there. But it feels like an absolutely urgent volume. And I found the biblical contributions so fantastic in grounding the constructive work. So Stephen and Melanie, and yeah. Yeah, well, I sadly wasn't here for that. But yeah, so I think somehow, I don't know what it means in terms of the structure of the volume, whether the biblical pieces ought in some way to be featured at the front, so as, or at least lifted up as granting us the kind of grounding for the constructive moves that are made throughout. And of course, there's the radical intimacy between the biblical pieces and Catherine's piece too, which is steeped in Bible all the time. So just some sense about how contesting, you know, the remark I made, right, when I asked my question after your quarters paper, like, why aren't we more literal? And that notion of an appropriate literalism about the ecological elements in Revelation, it's a striking thing that emerged here, to me anyway. It may be obvious to everybody else, but it struck me as significant.
I keep thinking about fugitive arrivals, and also thinking, you know, when Jake was talking about wayfaring, or, you know, from the great student panel about like the untraceable insect, you know, what are kind of these ways of being fugitive together against these scripts of coloniality and climate disaster and all white supremacy, everything that is bringing about the need for unveiling. So to me, kind of thinking about strategies for the future, how might we be fugitive together and take lessons from folks who have had to be more fugitive than we have, or that some of us have. And I think spaces like the TTC allow for an intimacy to build these connections of like real-bodied people who are trying to figure this out, but in a way that is not just you sit and have an academic paper and never see the person again. I mean, not just the folks who I went to Drew with or studied with at Drew are my friends here, but the people who I've been in these rooms with over the years at TTCs have become my friends. And in a time like now of fascism, like, how will we be friends together in the future, and how will we be fugitives together, and where? I was really appreciative that people brought in space along with time. Like, apocalyptic discourse can often be so much about time, and the where we will do this work, I think, was really helpful to be brought in. So those were my main thoughts. Oh, we're randomly.
I guess I will say something at this point. I just want to really say to everyone here, thank you so much for what you brought to this discussion, to these discussions, plural. And this goes back to the power of what's being said and how that needs to be conveyed in what is published. And so I want to really encourage us to think, when this does come into the print version, how can this be the sort of thing that doesn't take the role of a text in a library, but has the dunamis, to use a word my mother liked to use, of something that can do some real work in the world. So as I'm kind of thinking, I'd like to really have us push toward less of a collection of academic essays, which is of course fine, but more of a product that causes people to do something, a manifesto of such.
Will Fordham.
John?
Yeah. Well, can I just say that it's amazing that anyone has a mother who liked to use the word dunamis? I just think that kind of rocks.
Just a simple observation, kind of a revelation for me was, apocalypses come in all sizes, you know, from the planet encompassing to the minuscule, momentary. That was fascinating for me, and it was a feature not just of O'Neill's paper, but in a different way of Melanie's and some others as well. But apocalyptic, almost as like a genre of wisdom, or kind of a rather ordinary way of, you know, navigating this increasingly, you know, fascistic world. So, who's next?
Yeah, I just want to say a few things that kind of popped out to me, and then maybe something that I think could move us, I don't know, move us forward, but I don't know. I mean, I'm maybe a little bit hopeless on that front, but not us. We can move forward, but the world, yeah. Okay, so I think some of the things like apocalypse as necropolitics, race as trauma, race as apocalypse, these things, and also the immigration, you know, or migration, climate migrants. These are all kind of a piece, right? That thread came through. The relations, I really appreciated, Melanie, in your paper, we talked about this, but I love learning about Rebecca Cox Jackson and that relation of the heavens to the earth, so that spatiality. The learning to die well, you know, learning to die well is so huge, very helpful. Some of the relational stuff, like the transformational love. Karen, that long quote that you gave at the end, which I was not able to write down, but that was amazing, right?
I'll send it.
Yeah, who was it?
From Sadia Hartman's Wayward Lives, Beautiful
yeah.
Experiments, which
Right.
is just such a great book. Yeah.
And spider! Oh, I love you. I love you, little spider.
They're here to honor Catherine West.
Like the chthonic one. Thank you. Okay. Oh, that's very, you know, the spider's thread. We can revision Jonathan Edwards. Okay, so the thing that I thought that, so the transformational love, the relational, you know, like all of the, you know, the relational is so important. But I guess the thing that I heard, and maybe this is, you know, the last panel, so it's in my mind fresh, but was the place of affect, right? So how do we think about desire? Like, how do we think about inculcating certain kinds of desire? And then, John, you had mentioned Masumi, and I would love to hear a bit more about Masumi, but of course, for Masumi, we're talking about affect as movement. So how do we kind of create some of that affect as movement that can then bubble out maybe into desire or into other forms of quote-unquote emotion, right? So, yeah, so I guess those are some of the thoughts I'd put on the table.
Yeah, I'm really thinking a lot about the space-time piece in the sense that and how important the keeping the space-time together as opposed to I'm going to counter time with space, right? Because I'm thinking a lot about things like archive, so from Larato's paper, Aaron's, my own, right, and the bringing the music, it's another kind of, right, archive, but I'm also thinking about the whose and where issue that's been raised multiple times. I do think that not starting with the who, but starting with the where and when might help us, because I've been thinking a lot about this listening to everyone, because even when I say do space otherwise following Rubinstein, that is space otherwise, it's not like people haven't been. There are plenty of places where there's plenty of that otherwise happening. And it's me who's bringing it into my space to solve some problems. And so the care and the hesitancy that Aaron and I are both trying to approach this material is an acknowledgement that it's not like there haven't been alternatives. Always. The question is whether we have heard or embodied them or been with them. And then whether we can or should, or right, all the questions that come from that. And so for me, if we lead with where and when gets movement. We think space gets movement, but it's actually time that gets movement, right? That's the change. When and where and when, and then who, right? That might help us to kind of connect up the various pieces, because grief, like John, grief about the hospice, right? We could say whose grief, again, going back to Lerato's paper, right? Whose grief, but we could also say where grief, when grief, and then whose grief, as a way of seeing this kind of way even grief is multiple and not always reconcilable, right? Or in any way, obviously the same. So I've just been thinking about that combo.
And I would also add then, like, and how grief, right? Like,
Yes,
how are we doing this together?
That's
When,
the
where,
embodied.
how, with who? Yeah. But also, yeah, Aaron, I wanted to further highlight the desire and the affect and the eros that John brought in, and tie it to. I was really glad in the Q&A. John brought up your idea of the disillusion as dissing the solution. And this sense, Melanie and I were talking this morning about utopias are only great when they can fail. Like, they can't exist forever, utopia. And kind of this idea that desire is not sustained at the same intensity either. We have to kind of allow us to try out solutions and then diss them, desire something, and then realize when that is harm. I mean, I was thinking about Kathy's conversation with Marcia, and to me, sort of the question I thought Kathy was getting at is, do you have to stay in an abusive covenant? Right? That, like, if covenant is a relationship, what if the relationship turns abusive? What's your requirement, even your requirement to God? And so this dissolution, it doesn't mean not try to find solutions, but allowing our desires to change and develop was what I was really appreciative of that last bit, John, so thank you.
Desire and this, that's almost a title.
You're good. Aaron, I appreciate your reminder about the importance of affect. And I think I've been thinking about Stephen's question to me at the end of our panel about, like, well, what's the criteria for these ordinary apocalypses? And is that me?
That's an ordinary apocalypse.
But thinking about that question alongside John's paper about retraining desire, that, like, knowledge or belief is not enough, but perhaps John's paper is kind of an answer to Stephen's question to me, that these ordinary apocalypses are a retraining of desire, are moments of affect in which we're turned from hating the Fortune 500 men to thinking about them as beloved and singable subjects, if you will. Yeah, there's something there. I really appreciate your invocation of that, Aaron.
And we are, just by the way, we're going to make sure Catherine gets the last word, and so you've got the last 10 minutes today, guaranteed. Did you want a comment now, or do you want to hold? Then I'll do one last, and we'll open to the room. I'm struck with two things. three. One, how frequently, it shouldn't surprise when the topic is apocalyptic, how frequently in the conversations in the papers over this weekend the theme of a good death has come up. And I'm going to say this with extraordinary caution, given my role here. I stole it from Jorge Rodriguez. We both developed it, stealing it from Epictetus. That one of the important roles in coming into an institution, the energy of the institution is to keep it alive. The responsibility of the administration is to ask, what is a good death? Because that tells us what we don't do, what we won't compromise, where we won't go, what we want to make sure we did. And that's been part of an energy of where we're coming back. So there's vignette one. Vignette two, we're all mostly staying at the same place. And we stole a couple bottles of wine from dinner last night and took it back. And most of us sat around in the lobby and just talked in a free-range conversation that was everything from how are your kids, where did you grow up, I didn't know that about you, but also interspersed with writing, with whose work we absolutely love and why, with themes from the day, and it was very free form and dynamic. If you go to a conference to hear the papers, you're doing it wrong. You go to the conference for precisely those points of engagement. And if it sounds like your thought, oh my gosh, I wish I was in that group, yes, you do. It was great. And my only encouragement is that you're all either already or going to be in very similar groups yourself, and that'll belong to you. But what it made me think of is how much, to even draw from Jim's remarks, I mean, the reality of it is, the love is in the room with us. And that the fundamental point here is not that we agree, because there are profound differences among many of us up here, but that we keep engaging. And I think the same with the language of apocalyptic and the same with the language of utopia. It is process, not event. And that's the point. And the last one I was thinking is in looking at the continuity for all the pieces coming together. And I'm going to throw up a big flashing light that says theory of religion coming up, because that always kills the room.
Not
Everybody but John. Although I can tell you this, by the way, last night, 2 bottles of wine opened on the table, chattering away, and John still takes notes. But, you know, you can take, if you're trying to define apocalypse, we can take an approach to it, let's call it a structuralist approach to the definition of apocalyptic. That is the genre elements, the characteristics, what is apocalypse by some kind of taxonomy. Or you could take, to continue to borrow from theory of religion, a functionalist approach. Does it work the way apocalypse does? Which is kind of what I did with the science fiction thing when we opened up. So if it works that way, it's functionally apocalypse. I kind of think what sort of emerged from this weekend, though, would be almost sort of like a Diana Eck-like phenomenological approach to defining what we mean by apocalyptic, which is a new way, I think, of how we're finding this term and this concept and this moment and this experience kind of coming together. And I want to thank everybody for that. I think we do have the beginnings of something that's going to be different to the conversation. So that's mine. Jim.
So just to piggyback, you're saying, you know, where things really happen is, you know, when you have a bottle of wine and you're, you know, not the papers, but you're talking to each other in kind of an unstructured way. When I first came to Drew, at that time, the program I was came into was called Theological and Religious Studies, TNR. And there was an initial gathering of all the new TNR students with most of the faculty. And I think it was Catherine, but one of the faculty said, some of the most important things you're going to do are have conversations with each other, and that you're going to learn as much from your fellow students, if not more, you know. And that turned out to be true for me. I'm here for Catherine, but I learned a great deal from my fellow students. And it was in those conversations. One of them occurred right at the beginning, you know, just a couple of weeks after I got here. Very standard conversation between new graduate students. What are you here to study? I actually had come here wanting to kind of focus on public policy, public engagement, as being trained to think like a Christian about these problems. And at that time, it was like the only kind of thing I could kind of get a sense of is like, what should I be studying, was actually liberation theology. And so I came here like, yeah, I'm going to study liberation theology. But that conversation, I was working in the library at the closed reserve, so I was behind the counter, and she was just photocopying stuff, and the photocopier is right there in front of the counter there. I said, what are you here to study? And I said, yeah, blah, 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 whatever I said. And then I said, okay, so what about you? And she said, I'm here to study a Christian approach to nature. And I literally said to her, why would you waste your time doing that? Wow. You know, I'm into nuclear stuff, big issues, save the world, you know, and, you know. So I said, you know, is this ant that's crawling along here, is that more important than, you know, the life of your son? Just to be a total jerk about it, right? And she didn't take that bait, but she then said, and she'd already learned I'm an evangelical, says, well, you're an evangelical, why don't you read the Bible in light of this question? So I was like, okay, I will. So I took her bait. And it was when I came to Colossians 1:15 through 20, as Catherine knows, it was part of my dissertation. And particularly verse 20, and all things have been reconciled by his blood shed on the cross. And the blood of Jesus, for an evangelical, I mean, that's right at the heart of your faith. And I also was a peace and justice guy, so all things have been reconciled. So this was a big verse for the peace and justice crowd. But I had never noticed ta penta, which of course is everything, right? And all things. And Colossians is like, you know, whether things in heaven and things on earth, that essentially the Hebraic way of saying all things. And I had never seen it. I'd never seen it. But if I hadn't had that conversation with the student, fellow student, I maybe wouldn't even be sitting here today. But that completely changed the trajectory of my, what I started to study, and what I became in terms of my profession. So I would just encourage all the students, have those conversations, I'm sure you already are, but just recognize they can change your life. And they really are maybe even the most important part of your education journey here at Drew.
I guess to the room. Questions, thoughts, discoveries, spirited rebuttals, shouts of acclamation. Oh, here we go. Alex in front.
Thank you. Jim, I want to say I have appreciated your voice this morning and yesterday in many ways because it's a provocation. Personally, growing up in an evangelical community, going to Young Life, Sunday school, going through a place like Drew has in many ways been spurred by a desire to figure out how to hold the phrases that I know so well that you spoke yesterday. And it's interesting because Dr. Tatamino, your title yesterday it invoked this question of a passing species. And there's something about the good news proclamation, Jim, that you've been lifting up that is in direct tension and conflict with this question that we're also simultaneously grappling with this question of, is there a passing of the species? And so what I'm left with is a question in my heart and in my spirit about whether the possibility of human extinction negates the gospel. And in many ways, I want to say no, because my studies have moved in the direction of a post-humanist Christianity. This doesn't necessarily have to mean after human, but it does mean post-humanism. So I guess my question, and I wonder how other speakers hold this question, is whether a post-humanist Christianity is coherent, whether a post-humanist gospel is possible. There's a triumphalism, or the Christus Victor, the Christ's blood has overcome death, that in some ways invokes that good news question, and I wonder if we can still hold it if we also say that may not be offered to our species.
Anybody want a quick word, or do we just want to continue to drop in the room? Steve?
I know the question wasn't directed to me, but my only response would be Tim Beale's book, When Time is Short. That's all I'll say. It's really good.
Yeah, I think a post-humanist Christianity is eminently extractable from the gospel. I mean, fortunately, there are 4 of them, and the fourth of those in particular, he's a lamb, he's a vine, he's bread, he's water, he's light. He just can't settle for being merely human for very long, and not just because he's represented as divine as well. So, yeah, it's all in there, I think.
Yeah, I'm just feeling strong clarity that if there's going to be a future of the human, a vibrant future that we might look forward to for future generations of us, we've got to go post-humanist, right? I mean, post-humanism might be the presupposition for a future for the human.
And I so want to spatialize this conversation, this part of it, because so tapanta, you cannot see tapanta, you cannot know the all, you cannot even know the ant is the all without the God's eye view. Panta requires a God's eye, the all requires so that you can't know about that unless to put the ant into the all. So Christus Victor is the same. right? So there's lots of images of the heavens, Christus Victor heavens, right, in the top of buildings, all kinds of places. But there's also images of the democracy of the heavens, all the creatures, all the plants, there's all the people, all the saints, dead and living, right? Not living, but dead, right? So what is the images we use of the all, of the God's eye view? Because, and this goes back to Haraway, right? From a very early work about that. But then I would also say, you know, the good old, certain brands of good old feminist decentering Jesus is also recentering Jesus in the all. And what does that look like? Do we ask him to put down his sword? You know, like what does it look like to do that kind of collectivizing of Christ among many, right? Elizabeth Schusser Fiorenza used to say he's, you know, what is it, the first among many or whatever, like that idea that it doesn't require that he becomes no one, but it does require that he is one among all of us, which I still think he would have been okay with, or is.
Yeah, just, I mean, to build on what everyone has said, you know, my understanding for posthumanism is not an overcoming of the human, right, but a destabilizing of the limits between human and all other things. And if we're talking hybrid ontologies, I think Christianity is a real gift, you know, and Jesus is a real gift. But also like with a kind of Derridian limitrophy where it's not a flat, allness is not sameness, right? Destabilizing the limits and the differences are not getting rid of limits and differences, but honoring the ways in which they multiply and subtract. And, you know, my first TTC was like multiplicity and, I don't know, something. But, right, I remember Catherine saying, like, there is no relationship without difference. Right, but that multiplicity in which difference is folded together, to me, Christianity is. I wanted to say, like, well, why do you need Christianity? But if you want to keep it, it is there for you.
So I believe that there will be a literal resurrection in the new age. That right, and so. I also believe in human freedom, and that in our freedom we might be as profoundly, incredibly stupid as to knock ourselves off. But that won't be the final word. But I also get from the New Testament when the New Testament is with the revelation of the incarnation of the Son of God, saying, okay, how do we understand now in light of this, how do we understand why something exists, why we exist, how, you know, why creation came about? And so in John 1, Hebrews 1, Colossians 1, the communities are becoming incredibly creative with this question. And in Hebrews 1:3, it says, and all things are sustained by his powerful word. And then in Colossians 1:17, all things are held together by him. And so to me that says that the second person of the Trinity has this profound spiritual connection to everything, to all things. And so even if we were to be as stupid and as foolish as to extinguish ourselves from this present reality, that does not extinguish the relationship that God has with all of created reality. And again, for me, God will bring things to this new moment this new heaven and new earth, where even the foolish of us have been raised to walk in newness of life.
Your question framed was a coherent post-Christian humanism. I'm not, well, yeah. I'm not sure there is a, I'm sorry? Oh, Althea? Oh.
No, I just wanted to say that I'd like to promise on our behalf that we won't each one of us answer.
Right, okay. Yeah, no, it's a good question, though. I guess I would open with, I'm not sure that there is a coherent Christian, and I don't know that that bothers me. In fact, if there's coherence, I think that bothers me. The incoherence and the flaw, the failure of the utopia is the fuel. And it is the complexity that arises from the failure that provokes the reflection. It's the crack that lets the light in, if I can go Leonard Cohen. And the other part, though, to come back more seriously to your question, is explain to me any evangelical, biblical view of God that can somehow assure me that an omniscient God can become fully man and fully human, but not fully God and fully honeybee, or fully God and fully birch tree, or fully God and fully white oak. How do you know there has been no incarnational moment for the badger that makes sense to a badger, that rebuilds the badger, that exists for the badger, and that will redeem the badger? It's just none of your business, which is the very remark at the end of Job, to go back to Marcia's piece. You've got to deal with you, and frankly, humans, you're not doing such a great job on your own mess. Let the honeybee be the honeybee. So, yes, I've got humans made in God's image. It doesn't say, though, what part, nor does it say anything about what the image of the other things were made in. Yes, I have humans a little bit lower than the angels, but it doesn't say they're the only ones. So, get over yourself as a human and realize that there can be any of an array of incarnational moments out there. I think Althea, and then we're back over here with Susan.
Thank you. Hey, I'm a Commonwealth girl, you know. You stand up when you're asking questions. First, just listening to this conversation, I am so sorry I missed the 2 days that have preceded it. I really wanted to be here, but I have been getting over my own little cold and sniffles in this time. So I am concerned and anxious that I might be treading into waters that have already been covered this weekend. But as I've listened to you, I'm thinking with both Edward Glissant and I'm thinking with Lewis Gordon, and especially Gordon's concern that when we get so abstract, there are real material bodies, especially real material bodies of color, and their histories and their conceptualizations in the world that get lost in the conversation. So I've been wondering how to wade into the conversation. Then in this last part about God in everything and the difficulty of seeing God, I think with Glissant's tout monde as a resistance to the imperial tendency to see singularly, and the tout monde as part of a triad of Glissantian thought in which the ability to conceptualize oneself as part of the totality of a relation in the world is a different epistemic framework. from the homogenizing singularity of the empire. And it makes me wonder how that enters into this conversation. And if I reinstate the bodies that I'm missing, especially bodies like mine that are not only immigrant, black, gay, and all kinds of things, how does that underside perspective see the top side that abstracts, even when we think in terms of the post-human? And I'm trying to get a question out of all of this, but part of the question is, how does that materiality break through and participate in conversations about the post-human when some of our bodies have not even been made human as yet? How do we conceptualize or reformulate? And just because I don't know any better, with apologies to Catherine, is this an apocalyptic moment, not only for the badger, but for the excluded? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful comment, and those wonderful. And I think there's a really, really cool way to connect both of what and everything that's just been said, and kind of in some ways. This conversation reminded me of not only Unbat's Min, who was a daykeeper in what is now Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, etc., and also the work of Sylvia Winter, so Min has this whole notion of, and kind of to your point about those who have been constructed in such ways where they are excluded. Men in Secrets of Mayan Science / Religion, he makes the point, and this has been a cool thing because I think every paper I've heard here has found ways to riff off of the text, off of the biblical text. And Unbat's Min has basically said, well, you've gotten the text wrong. And he defines religion as the coming together of that which has been separated. And in that sort of format, he's saying, well, at the beginning of this Genesis story, there was androgyny. There was so many things that have been lost. And he kind of puts that in reference to when the Spanish brought Christianity to that region, the cross, which was once seen as a symbol of the relationship between trees, and because if you look at Yucatec Maya, the word there, it really refers to the tree as the human, and the tree preceding, because humans come from the tree. And so this connection, and also what Sylvia Winter talks about in desettling the coloniality of being, where she's talking about, well, even the terminology of humanity has been constructed around a certain so-called white man, and this is where everything comes from. So I think, yes, there is potentiality in various readings of Christianity to move way beyond that, But yeah, so I think both of them are actually asking us, well, have we really taken the value of what is there and done what we could do with it?
Thanks, Althea, and it's so good to see you. I'm so glad you're here. I really am finding O'Neill's concept of ordinary apocalypse really just helpful and illuminating. And I think in the ways in which apocalypse can become abstracted because it's so huge, right? And of course, there are huge apocalypses that happen to the excluded. But I wonder if we even miss the actual flesh of the excluded when we're talking on the grand scale of apocalypse. And O'Neill was talking about ordinary apocalypses that just happen in the everyday life. And for me, it brought to mind the ways in which sometimes we struggle to be in solidarity with the everyday apocalypse. We can say, oh, I'm against white supremacy, but I didn't really care that my black colleague just got screwed over in a faculty meeting, or I said nothing. Right, so I think your question to bring the flesh back is also a question to bring the everyday ways in which the huge apocalypses actually live in our bodies in these small ways that wear them down all the time. And I think one of the questions is, how do we be in solidarity with the everyday apocalypse that is actually stemming from these larger ones? So I just appreciate you bringing that in. And I think, although, O'Neill's were based in Cincinnati and not wherever, like, that concept of ordinary apocalypse could be really interesting when done through decolonial thinking and the actual narratives of the everyday apocalypse that the excluded people go through within our own halls, too. Yeah.
And just for folks in the room, I think that Jacqueline Hidalgo's work is really good on this point, right? So just bringing that in as a resource.
So I'm wrapping up my 14th semester at Drew. Most people don't drag it out as long as I have, but I've managed to, stick with it, and I'm not done yet. But I just, so going back to, what Drew does well, I have a lot of life experience that's not typically fodder for good seminary students. But I think, what Drew allowed me to do is to take what I knew or didn't know or learned and sort of put it all together in the way that made sense for me, which probably would not make sense for anyone else, but, that's okay. I'm able to do that, and that's why I think that's one of the great things about Drew. The other thing is, as I mentioned, students come and go, faculty stay for decades. And I've been, I hesitate to use this word, but very fortunate, very blessed to have great faculty here. Some, like the Louisville scholars, Dr. Quigley, came and went, right? And others have not. So I just want to, I don't want to call anyone else out, but I appreciate your scholarship. Scholarship, teaching, mentorship. These are the three things that I think are really critical at Drew. And I probably shouldn't say this, but my husband and I chose to endow a small scholarship for the faculty at his alma mater to retain the good faculty. Well, not there's bad faculty, but to maintain the people who excel in scholarship, teaching, and mentorship. So there.
Hi, Carolina, master degree student here at Drew. Becoming a PhD student. But thank you. I don't like to do that, but thank you. It's okay. I just want to appreciate the content of these 2 days 3 days that we have been sharing together, because I love interdisciplinarity. I love to mix things. My passion is to mix things in general. I feel about scholarship as a creative opportunity to generate more dialogues than divisions. And I feel like these 3 days are a reflection of that desire. So I truly appreciate it. And I appreciate especially the challenge, specifically in terms of how we think about sacrificial zones and how we think about necropolitics, how we think about animals. I'm very, my field, if I can put it in those terms, I'm really focused on bringing together health and spirituality as a hypothyroidism, how do you say, when you when you yeah, well, I have apocalypsism, so I really bring that chronicle disease into my scholarship, and I also bring curanderismo as a very daily, cotidiana, a practice that we daily put in women's life in general, in many cases in Latin America. So I found during these 3 days the understanding of, first, the urgency of understanding autoimmune and non-communicable diseases as something that is not only happening to the human, but also to the more than human. I feel like they are the reflection of a more general symptom of the several ecological crises that we are going through. And I was wondering, like, for example, when hearing to Beth, okay, I wonder what animals are going through the same thing, and we are not studying because we don't give it the same hierarchy of importance in our study as a human beings. And then I was thinking, like, wow, how necessary it is to keep bringing to the table those other spiritualities that are not considered official religions, and hence those epistemologies that may bring us, that they may bring to the table a different way of constructing knowledge, but also to thinking and to relate with the world, how they are they are totally needed in this conversation, how we understand the animism behind things. So I felt that reassurance, that highlight of the importance of keep working on the intersection of gender, culture / religion and race, but also to keep working in the dualistic vision of animals versus human, or nature versus human, and how that, se filtra. Yeah, like how that filters in everything else. I think that I'm doing a little bit of Spanish English there, but yeah. Anyway, thank you so much.
When I study, I read the works by Professor Keller. I read many of your books, and this is the first time I meet you in person, so I'm very grateful. When I did my PhD, your works are part of my study, so thank you so much. Second, many of my people from Burma living in the United States, many of them are in hiding. They cannot attend the church for current political situation. And Professor Stephen Moore, you led your lecture yesterday. I'm so grateful for that. Despite some challenge in this time, people like you and many others stand up and show solidarity with the most vulnerable people. And thank you so much for your lectures yesterday. And I saw Professor John online, but this is the first time I meet you in person. So I'm very grateful for that. And Drew University accepted many Burmese students. And as one of church leaders from Burma, I'm very grateful to the institution. Please continue to have the church and theological education in our country. President Trump banned our country, so in the near future, they cannot come, but after 2030, if Burmese students apply for admission here, please continue to accept students from Burma. In this way, you have the church and theological education in our country. Please keep that in mind. And this is the first time that I come to Drew, and I hope and pray that this will not be the last time. Thank you so much for your lecture yesterday and today. Thank you.
I just wanted to acknowledge Carolina's thoughtful remarks, and just want to encourage you that the importance of something like curanderismo is so vital, and such a practice of recognizing wisdom in ways that Western science and colonial spaces deems non-normative or even useless. And I think that is it's operating with a similar paradigm to the phenomena that Dr. Spencer Miller has noted about what we deem animate and inanimate, and thus valuable or not valuable. And keep doing that work, please. It's so important. And I felt like the spirit of Latin America was lacking in this conversation over the weekend, and so I'm glad that there are folks like you and Felipe and others that are taking that up, so thank you.
Before I forget, I meant to mention this earlier. The spider was actually trying to reach Catherine because the spider read Catherine's first book and was wanting to get to know the author better. So unfortunately, the spider's left the room. But that's what the spider was doing here.
Yeah, I appreciate the way this conversation is unfolding here, because I think that when I first walked in, John, you were mentioning the literal text kind of issue, which has come up in a few places. And I know our colleague Emily Filler, who hasn't been here, is doing this plain sense of the text kind of approach. And I have to say, as a biblical scholar who's trying to, in every way, continue to live into these spaces, I think that still prioritizes the technology of print and the printed word, which is a Western colonial everything. And so I just want to think about, because it also means we don't get song, we don't get performance, we don't get lived orality around the text, which is ever, always, only what makes it alive. Ever, always, only what makes it alive. I mean, another piece of my work about the John Nelson Darby, Mr. Father of Dispensationalism, is when you look at what he's doing with the Bible, it's like engineering. It's science. He's cutting it and taking it apart, reorganizing it, and lists and lists and lists and connect lines and lines. It's a very particular way, embodied way, to interact with the text. And it's not dance, and it's not song. I do hope he sings songs in his life. I hope that for him. But it's science when he's doing that, right? Or science engineering, really, is what I want to call it. So just to come back to actually Bryant's paper yesterday, and also something I've been thinking a lot about, is what would it mean for us, remember my where, when, here at Drew, now in this season, to embrace biblical theology as an intellectual discipline and theological discipline in our school, in our way. Because I think what happens is we have to appeal to, oh, we're doing phenomenology, or we're doing materialism, or we're doing liberation theology, but what we're not, and the Bible comes along because it must. I think, what does it look like to do our Drew version in all of its complexity and mininess and beauty, to do biblical theology in that song, in that register, in that space and place? Because right now, our academy historically has ejected that as a space because we're countering the literalists. We're in the kind of historical, critical, white American, Euro-American tradition. We don't do biblical theology in seminary. Well, there are many people who do biblical theology in seminary, why can't we do it like the world and the global church does it? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I'm just wanting to invite us. And then the scholarly, like, oh, we can appeal to phenomenology and kinetic materialism because it gets that. It holds those pieces together, everyday religion. It gives us a way of talking about those things as scholars. But many of our students who are committed to ministry, they need to do biblical theology and other kinds of, and they want to and they do, including doctoral students, I should say. So I'm just wanting to throw that out as a what would that look like? We might need to rename it, or maybe we claim the name and re-signify it. But I'm wondering about it.
About the spider, I don't know what happened to it, but I did just read an article that said, like, don't put spiders outside because they don't survive out there. So I don't know, but that was just sort of an interesting kind of side note. As someone whose first encounter with Christianity was in like a non-denominational, evangelical, free, Bible-believing church that was literally on the marquee, the Schofield Bible was like our King James Schofield Bible was our study Bible. I was fed a steady diet of reading the signs of the times often, and I was struck, Catherine and Stephen, by your papers that you were doing that in ways that were similar but more responsible, but also just in a way that seems to be taking up a space where the folks who have been reading these signs for so long don't realize they've become the problem, right? That they've become the people in the story that are the bad guys, right? And so your sort of eco-literalist reading of it was really intriguing, drawing those parallels. And then Stephen, your kind of reading of Donald Trump as not the capital A Antichrist, but sort of an Antichrist that's sort of in a long sort of string of Antichrists that we've seen. Both of those like really were interesting to me because of how they are kind of maybe opening up a way to talk to folks who have been thinking this way for a long time. But showing them a different way to think that way, right? Or a different way to identify what's going on here. In the midst of that, too, I was struck both by John and O'Neill's papers because, I mean, we're all kind of in this situation, and John's paper about hospice and palliative sort of approach to how do we care for the humans and the more than humans that are kind of wrapped up in all of this, I found to be really helpful in thinking about what we ought to do. And then O'Neill, in your paper, I found, in your readings, I found a sense of like, how do we care for ourselves in the midst of this, right? How do we recognize and find moments where we are sort of, I guess to use a more pious word, fed by what we are experiencing in the world, right? And how that connects to our larger kind of self. I have a question here. I'm coming away with that with a strong sense of hope in some sort of ways for what's possible and for how we can maybe have dialogue with folks that we maybe wouldn't have had before or who wouldn't have been open to kind of what we're thinking about. But also just hope in that like we need something to sustain us, right? And I think that all of that gives me, I'm kind of just sort of, now I'm riffing, but, or wandering, I should say. But that's kind of where I got from. So I guess I'm curious, the question is, did anyone else get that sort of sense of hope? And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
This is not necessarily about the sense of hope, and maybe it's partly because you're asking this question, but I've been thinking about John's point that like, what is this volume going to be, and thinking about like talking to other people. And I've really found it useful to be using Timothy Snyder's 20 lessons from the 20th century on totalitarianism. It's very like teachable. There's a graphic novel version that's very teachable to undergrads, but the original version is pocket size to fit in like a men's jeans pocket, but we can have another conversation about that. But I was wondering if there could be, it would be more work for the people who already wrote papers, sorry, but 20 lessons from the apocalypse as this kind of volume where it really was for a popular audience, or like as Susan said, like part of this hope is happening in the classroom. So like how do we teach a hope draped in black, or, you know, teach this. And so just to offer it as a form to the publisher, that I also am like imagining down the road a 20 lessons from the TTC to like revisit the volumes, right? Have someone from each volume write a short lesson from that year. But 20 lessons from the apocalypse I could see as a seller, and a way to say that this conversation matters outside this room, and to publish it pocket-sized. You know, how do you carry these? To me, the hope is only if we can carry these conversations out into the world. So how do we do that in the form we know? Right now we know writing. It would be great if there was a way to put a MP3 in there too or something, John, but you know, something like that.
Yeah, I just want to say, why not both? Because what Susan said and what others have said about the importance of scholarship and the way that the scholarship is also read and readable by students and everyday people if they commit to it. But remember that the original codices or codices of the collection of Paul's letters or whatever, they were pocket-sized, so they could travel. And then the other thing is, remember, the late great Planet Earth is a really thin book, and yet there were millions and millions of little, more thin study guides for that book, not for the Bible, but for the late great Planet Earth. So what would that look like to have study guides for the TTC that are like 20 lessons from? For the whole series, I say, right? But why not both?
Well, for the 20 lessons, John gave us 4, right? Which were, John Tatamil. Yeah. You're looking around. Who? It's sort of like when Judith Butler said, I was involved in queer theory. You know, yeah. Who, me? Yeah, so the democracy of all creatures, so hearing all the voices, planetary co-belonging that includes the inorganic, robust, effective counters to greed, which includes compassion for all, and the need to counter the ego, and then needing otherwise practices of desiring. So I just want to rename those because those were 4 very, for me it was very inspiring to have actually concrete points that were like, yeah, we need to do that. And then how do we do those, right? How do we get, which was my earlier question, how do we get that robust affective encounter to greed? And John, I think you would also maybe say music is part of that, right?
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for bringing us back to Masumi. You know, because yeah, his text, Semblance and Event, Activist Philosophy, and the Occurrent Arts is like super dope, and yeah, affect as this motion, and how he talks about, well, when we're looking at art, and we're looking at the ways in which sometimes art, if it's a painting, it's seen to be static, but it's really not. You know, and he talks about what it means to understand the world, and this of course goes back to Whitehead's notion of, well, you know, everything is creativity, creativity is beauty, which goes between the ventures of ideas and process and reality. But yeah, I mean, how, and this is why I call things like music, painting, sculpture, aesthetic religions, because they are engaged in a type of transformation, and that transformation, it can be transcendent in a more classic sense, it can be non-theistic, it can be but it's a way in which people make affective meaning in the world. And so, yeah.
I made the terrible decision of writing a book about hope called Making Hope last year. So I feel obligated to say something.
It's a great little book.
It is a great little book that teaches very well, I think. But I felt something this weekend that I think is hopeful, or something that I've described in the past as dark hope. And it's quite close to what Catherine described in Miguel de la Torre's work of hopelessness, that he says in a lecture at Biola University, of all places, it's on YouTube, he asks the audience, do you seek justice because you're going to win or because it's right? And he says, I seek justice because it defines my humanity, it defines who I am as a Christian. And I've said this in countless places, and I'll say it again, that it's like the only thing that lets me get out of bed in the morning. That hope is not predicated on victory, it's not predicated on success, it's rooted in mystery and uncertainty. And I had these moments this weekend of like, oh damn, yeah, a third of all trees, or nearly half of biomass in the oceans. Like, gosh, I didn't realize that we were there yet. And still, persistence is vital, not because those species will come back or can come back, but because it's good, it's true, it's a witness to making the world otherwise, even in its impossibility. And I'm really grateful for your question, and I'm grateful to each of you for helping me see that and rekindle that.
Yeah, I just want to like riff and throw out some more lessons. I don't think they all have to be framed as hows, but I'm going to frame them as hows. But like how to die well, how to eat chili in Cincinnati, you know, like how to talk to dragonflies, how to fly or fall, how to sing, you know, how to arrive. Like, I think there's a lot from each of your offerings that could be turned into this. Yeah, yeah. Pay me. No.
Just to actually, hopefully not change the subject too drastically, but I knew that many of you have an evangelical background, and the singing yesterday softly and tenderly, there was a message there, you know, come home, that for evangelicals, we can fall into, more so than I think other groups, but I'll leave that aside. I know evangelicals do this, which is either or thinking. And it could be that in your journey, you have rejected your evangelical heritage, your evangelical background. And I would encourage you to not be in that either or mode, and think about what from your background can you now integrate into who you are in a way so that you can make peace with whatever it was that you went through. Because I know that for many folk, it's just, your experience could have been incredibly damaging, so I'm sorry for that. But I just would encourage you, there could be good things there. It could be that the things you have to be in touch with are the bad things, and you have to make peace with that. But there could also be good things there. So just encourage you to kind of like reflect and think on that.
Thank you for, right.
Sure. I'll stand up because I feel like I have to as well. Thanks, Jim. Singing that song I thought was really powerful. Dr. Spencer Miller, in Teaching Theologies, you gave an incredible lecture about, I don't remember the song it was, but about it was similar. It was an altar call song in Jamaica. And what song is it? Do you know what? It's okay. But that point of both understanding that song, we'll say it's the same song, in the context of coloniality, and then also something that breaks open that colonial context was so powerful to me. It's what sparked my paper for this lecture, in part, and kind of moving into the post-critical stuff. And that ties to, I want to say, not to close this conversation, but to bookend it, to return to the corporeality of the text. Something that I struggled with Heschel is he does this great biblical theology. Sorry, not to endlessly reference my own paper, but he does this great biblical theology, but then in the prophets, he also forgets the kind of critical remembering of like the community of people who were surprised again and again and again by the prophets enough to keep them alive. So I think that for me, that connection of, gosh, sorry to go full evangelical, that connection of being surprised by hope, to go full NT right, I have a lot that I disagree with him, but the title of that book is so good, of constantly being surprised by hope. So I don't really have a question. This is another one of those great rambling things, but the question of having the small portable apocalypse that we carry with us, doesn't have to be pocket-sized, but it can be portable. And constantly being that sense of the connection of surprise, hope, and perpetuality in community is where I'm trying to land, and I think where I felt really most seen and most like I belong here today. Not that I usually feel like I don't belong, but thank you for this, and I hope that sparks something. I don't know. I think it was the Old Rugged Cross, and it was one of those songs that, I don't know, you're like, oh, there's so much like dispensationalist stuff in there that it's really hard to reconcile. So, yes, thank you for that lecture, by the way. Yeah, Lorato?
Oh, good morning, and apologies for my lateness. I have other duties. Number one, thank you for this moment. It is, I think I'm still pinching myself to be in the presence of everyone, those who were here earlier on, and even those that are still here. I will forever be grateful for this moment and the conversations had and still to be had. So my question slightly takes us back to the question that we were just having earlier on. And if this has been covered, my apologies, I will sit down. My own personal work draws on Ubuntu and process thought as resources for reimagining God, power, and future beyond colonial metaphysics, especially from communities for whom apocalypse is often less a coming event than an inherited condition, yet whom continue to create. I had to write this because I thought to myself, Mashapa is going to be in the room. Let me not fumble, write it down. So my question is this. If apocalypse, and this is specifically sort of for JT and other comparative theologians in the house, if apocalypse originally names unveiling or disclosure rather than simply catastrophic ending, how might comparative theology resist the dominance of Christian or Western meanings that now govern how crisis is named and imagined across disciplines? Considering the fact that this is being done in US, it's a US university, predominantly US scholars, very few of the papers named scholars outside of continental America. And relatedly, how do we engage not only indigenous Africa, but all indigenous cosmologies and other traditions on their own terms, where crisis may be understood less as final destruction than as rupture, imbalance, or loss of right relation? And I thank you.
Just briefly, doctors take a Hippocratic oath to do no harm, and I wish pastors would do the same. I'm taking Dr. Moore's and Dr. Feller's class this semester on violence. And, I had a relatively good experience with evangelicalism, but I look around the classroom and I see the pain on the face of people who've been profoundly harmed. And so I acknowledge your acknowledgement, but I am profoundly affected by it.
Can I take a first stab at Lorado's question, even though I'm not a comparative theologian, nor do I portray one on TV? And also indirectly into that point about the evangelicalism and Jim's wonderful point about continuing to find meaning in various places of rituals. I still do daily Bible reading from my mother's Bible. I still pray regularly. I still sing those songs, and I can do the harmony along with you if you want to later. I'm still an evangelical. I have never left the Bible. I read a Bible that tells me over and over and over again that there are characters, whether it is Noah or Abraham or Paul, who realized that the point was more growing toward God than being near God. And that meant that they had to give up the thing that they were born with. And I still see myself, even though what I've come to see and think about God is very different. As I draw close to any one person, I learn more things about them that continues to change how I think about them. And as I experience that, of course I'm going to be different. And of course what it looks like is going to be different. And of course what I'm going to confess is going to be different. And of course how I'm going to engage it is going to be different. That means it's working. It is a becoming, not a being. And I think to touch your question, Lorado, that is the continued challenge of finding the voice of the other and harmonizing with it. Of finding the space where there is no hope and offering the one thing I've got for you: companionship. I don't have an answer, but I got about an hour and a bottle of wine. And we'll be there together.
Fantastic question, and I think the question is yours more than it is any of the rest of us. I'm not sure I'm very good at answering your question, in part because as an immigrant who got here when I was almost 9, it's unavoidable that I think with the resources that have shaped my context, and my thinking context has been US. So even when I engage Indian sources, I engage classical Indian sources that are portable and have in some ways, classical sources. Shantideva, Shankara, these kinds of texts that are rendered accessible and available in English, though I can check the Sanskrit too. So in a way I have to name that my thinking is a kind of itinerant migrant thinking from here to a place I left so long ago that it's not there for me to recover, in all the poignancy of that. That said, I should also say that your question is fantastic, but also Stephen Charleston's book, Indigenous Episcopal Person Whose Hybridity Itself is quite compelling. He's I don't know if he's Lakota, but he's got a great book called We Survived the End of the World. And even the title is just so fecund. He's saying, you know, for indigenous Native Americans, our apocalypse has already happened. And we've lived, and we are trying to figure out how to keep living after the apocalypse. So even right here on this continent, there are indigenous resources that are not being attended to. Even well-positioned people like Stephen Charleston, who's an Episcopal bishop, for goodness sake. Like, you know, so we need to be reading people like that too.
I'm also not a comparative theologian, but I found great wisdom in Catherine Youssef's book, A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, in which she says that this present moment is being called the end of the world. It only is because white liberalism is under threat, that's the case. And that worlds have been ending as long as the world has been in existence. And so I find her work a great source of wisdom, but also some of the folks that Dr. Spencer Miller has already invoked here, Edward Glissant, the Walcotts, Edward Said's notion of beginning over against origins, I think is really helpful fodder for the important work that you're doing. And I'm so thankful for your reminder of the blackness of futurity. There's something really rich there. I'm so excited to see what it becomes.
Yeah, just to that point, I think tying it to John's point, like hope it can only come by like real deep witness to those who have realized the apocalypses have been happening over and over again. But I think the risk, which you're bringing up, is to not co-opt and commodify those. So the harder part of your question, and I do not have an answer to it, is how do you let those sing and speak in their own terms without us doing the colonial violence, you know, even of just like, well, I quoted this indigenous scholar, so like I covered my ass. Like, no, but you know, I do not have an answer to that. I hope that you help us with that. And I hope I don't then commodify you in doing that.
That's a great question, Lorato. Fantastic question. Oh, it's my good. No, it's all good. I think about this in various ways. I think my mind first goes to Gonzalo Guerrero, who was a Spanish conquistador who actually, and this happened right by where my father was born in Belize. So Aguero was captured by those who history was redefined as the Maya, and he, for a while, was a slave in this domain, but then he actually became a part of the community. And so fast forward a little bit later, he begins to transform himself because of his context. And Cortez gets back there and tries to get him to come back to the Spanish. He's like, no, I'm Maya, you know? And I think what happens in that sort of context is not, well, I lord over this and no, transformation occurred. And this, of course, goes back to how various people before the colonizers understood what community could be, and understood what engagement, to go back to what Umbatsmin, and this is in Yucatec Maya, in Lakesh Alakin, I am you, you are me. It's a different understanding. So what if comparative theology, and I think Jose Francisco Alistora is one of my good friends, talks about this in his work, wonder as a new starting point for theological anthropology. He talks about this in various, we're actually reading him in Existentialism on Monday, so I'm glad to talk about him. But yeah, I think a lot of this, and this is not a perfect answer, but I think it goes back to presuppositions around how we are related. And there sometimes is this presupposition that, well, if I'm here, then what I'm doing is intersecting as opposed to realizing already existing relation. So, and that doesn't in any way say, well, this and that are the same, but it causes it causes us to kind of reimagine what resonance is. And I talk about this in my work. Well, a line versus a perforation. A line says, okay, well, this is that. A perforation. And this is kind of what Jennifer Lisa Vest talks about in her work, The Promise of Caribbean Philosophy, when she says, we have to really reimagine the ways in which we've done philosophy, because it's been this conversation with trying to justify this work with the so-called West, right? And she's saying what she calls a new dialogic is a more inner relation between voices that have not been thought to be in relation. So let's stop trying to justify the work of Paul Ntunji with Kant. Let's stop all that. Why don't we have conversations between the philosophies of Trinidad and what Ntunji's doing? Why don't we have conversations between, well, how does this relate to various things we haven't been in conversation with? So I think maybe a part of it, this is, like I said, a faulty answer, but maybe a part of it is reimagining what it means to interact. And maybe interacting may be a different starting point, to use Morales Torres' language.
I've been thinking a lot about the invitation to return, to come home, you said. And when you said that, it reminded, I kind of had an evangelical adjacent kind of travel in my life, but it makes me think of a song that's very much sung in Drew Chapel here, Coming Back Home by Another Road, right? And we're coming back home by another road. And I thought about the fact that it's the back, B-A-C-K, that's the problem in that song for me, right? Because it's maybe we're going on home by another road, like, because if we go back home, it's not the home, right? What are we going back to, right? And maybe and I'll just give a very specific example for me that I'm taking away from this conversation, this conference. One of the sparkly things about serendipity of research, there's a couple of those sparkly things in my research. One is that Rebecca Cox Jackson's, one of her 2 only surviving manuscripts of her journal, one of them is in my hometown in the library that I spent many hours when I was a child. And so I discovered that in this journey, and now I'm gonna go on home by another road, right? And then the other thing is I also discovered that Miller of the Millerites, right, the kind of early millennialist who was claiming again and again, and no, it's today, he's coming back today, and right, that early American kind of millennialism, also born in my hometown. So so when I'm thinking about my own inheritances, being racialized white with all its rights and privileges, all of its blind spots, all of its particularities, part of my process has to be going on home, but going on home, back home, going on home by another road, right? And so I just want to put those pieces together for the racialized white folks in the room, because there's work, and also American white folks, because I don't want to only say white folks, but white folks where, right? White folks when. That part of my work is a going on home, right? But it doesn't have to be a going back home, right?
Just to invoke Jake Erickson's work, I think that's important to reframe going on home in light of displacement, in light of exile, and not just human exile, but the earth itself going into a kind of exile. The reframe of that is brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on that as well, in terms of like who can, go back. Like many people can't, and so that I think speaks to Althea, your point as well. Like there are people who are excluded from being able to go back, and I think when I was thinking about the narratives of formerly enslaved folks, like, that makes heaven, right? Arrival in a cosmic space, and arrival in a space that has such a different perspective, really meaningful. And then it also means, though, to understand that, we do need to go on home with other thinkers, right? With other philosophers, theorists from elsewhere. And yeah, I think these are really, really like lessons for the apocalypse. Like, here's another one.
I'll sing more if you want. I love to sing.
It's not more. I forgot to mention what my greatest lesson is from the conference. And I forgot to write that down. I'm going to try to be succinct. Yes, we came in prepared and understood apocalypse as, the premise of this was looking at apocalypse now and when. But in the delivery of the papers, I was taken back to process and, in a way, process and reality with Whitehead moment, that concrescent moment of concrescence, and the becoming. There is an awe in apocalypse that, and that's why I was talking about reframing how we look at it. You, or including my colleagues on Friday, I got to see the honest that might be hidden in that unveiling, the newness, the becoming. And I know I am speaking to only 2 or 3 people in the room, but that's fine. And that moment. So for me, it's the awe. And I know I could go and use Whitehead's words, but I'm calling it all, right? It's because there is a surprise, there is newness, there is creativity in that honest. And I think I raised that earlier question because it will be sad to have those moments where everything is coming together and there is, in this room, and there is that newness happening, or, and then, it goes on to become more moments of becoming, and there are limited voices in the room. And that's why I raised that. But I just needed to raise the awe, and if it does not make sense, my apologies.
Yes.
Oh, not all. Not all. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, Catherine. Oh, amen. Yeah, so I need to do some kind of closure. That's better, right. And I won't even pretend that this feels like closure of my 40 years here at Drew. It feels like just another disclosure, another opening up of further conversations. And I'm expecting those to, go on everlastingly. So, yeah, in conclusion, I'm really just tempted to read all of the titles of the talks, that would feel like a really good way of concluding. Book of Job as Antidote to Apocalypse, Revisioning Punitive Space around the slave narratives, Inhabitants of the Earth, these are the short titles, The Damned of the Earth and the Necro-Apocalypse, Ordinary Apocalypses, Exercises of Noticing, and gravity down, rapture and the revelation of heavens. Well, I want to just go on, right? Self-study, multi-racelessness, after apocalypse, unveiling climate activism, planetarity, and spirituality for a passing species. Yeah, you know, I just want to go on with these thoughts, these words of yours, and I find the manifold of words of this conference somehow echoing with somehow, I don't know if I can. Yeah, I'm hearing the echoes of, I think, just 20 years of TTCs. Not every year did we have them, but behind that, yes, my 40 years echoing, and that is an echo effect that might come through the mic if I actually hold it here. But it's an echo effect that is a kind of repetition of constant difference. And you know, what drew me here, what drew me 40 years ago is going to continue to, I can't say continue to drew me, but maybe I will. Okay, what drew me 40 years ago is going to keep on drewing me until I die. And that has something to do, of course, with all of those, oh gosh, right, that's going to be better than my waving hand. Thank you. That what drew me to this forest 40 years ago, I didn't know had anything to do with a forest, but it kept growing and out there, and what Drew was becoming was ever more ecological in what had already drew me through more of its deep commitment already 40 years ago to a rich pluralism of perspectives open to serious religious pluralism that was there, and a real interest in a strong feminist voice, a real invitation to let that become strong and communal and disclosive here. And only gradually did we wake up rather vividly to other dimensions that had been drawing us and then began to drew us, and especially that has to do with racial and ethnic difference and the rich diversities as those would combine with older traditions that drew of Christian social justice, praxis, and pluralism, and combined with the ecology as these many trees grew together. And yeah, so there is in that growth for me over those 40 years as the forest continues to grow, and as I hope to also, a kind of alpha omega dynamic that I don't expect will ever stop here, or perhaps anywhere in the universe. Perhaps, if we sneak off and do a little process theology together, we can remind ourselves that every moment has a kind of alpha omega dimension to it, a lure to a better possibility, one that is taking in more of its world and its complex history, so that alpha that draws us to take in more from the past towards that omega point in that very moment Omega, a marvelous letter, because it's all about an opening, right? That's what the Omega draws. I didn't say it looks like a vagina. I did not say that. Okay, I'll retire. But that alpha omega dynamic, moment to moment in process theology, because it's not that everything concludes, let alone in a satisfactory moment, or richness even in that particular moment. But there is a certain kind of coalescence that happens, and then that contributes itself to the next omega and to all the subsequent zillions of omega, alpha, alpha, omega, micro dialectics adding up into vast systemic processes in which new beginning can't quite be resisted altogether, can't quite be stamped out, and in which forms of closure happen, even if we are in denial of them. So yeah, that process, ultimate cosmological eco-pluralism, has been something that has I think been working very hard in this community, in multiple vocabularies, and I think through these TTCs, capturing mysterious links to force fields that go across the planet. And I think that's going to go on drawing us, that sense of the force field. So a more planetary forest is helping to sustain us, and we're helping to sustain it. And that planetarity is at one and the same time in dire condition, and we at Drew have been warning about that for a long time with this eco-social justice sense of what we need to connect in and through and for. How we theologize it has continued to evolve, to go through a lot of deaths of God. And you all do know, of course, that death of God theology was born here, Altizer, Drew Conference. Was that 60 years ago? Yeah, I think so. So we here worship a God who I think feels very honored by the death of God tradition that we have persisted in, because that God whom we honor here has been pretty nauseated by most of what goes under the name of God, and will be if I keep calling it God for more than another sentence or two, probably. So I've been happy that at Drew we also practice a disciplined kind of apophasis, a systemic silence. And this conference hasn't said much about God. So when the God word happens, it's, I suspect, all the more meaningful. It has an odd little edge of holiness about it, just because we recognize how tacky, how idolatrous it would be if we said it much more, that God word. So yeah, I think God thinks we're pretty cool a lot of the time here, but I don't speak for her. Sorry for them. Sorry, give up. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to the way this theological school here in NJ, is that New Jersey, or is that the New Jerusalem, is going to continue to germinate. And I'm hoping that the aesthesis of the forest and its rigorous messages will continue to be heard in the silent spaces and in the great storms. I'm really imagining that a rigorous sense of the distinction of hope from optimism is going to keep repeating itself here. And hey, Chris Bosel's not here today, so I don't have to admit that, again, that it was Barth who said we as Christians are neither optimists nor pessimists, but hopeful. Oops, I quoted Barth again. There were other Barthians at Drew when I came, and the most serious Barthian was the one who did not vote for my coming, but it was a Drew Barthian who did take me out for lunch and didn't apologize to me that he had voted against my coming, but confessed to me, which I thought was terribly cool. So and the Barthianism of Drew has vastly evolved in a very hopeful direction since then. So, yeah, I think that this kind of rigorous hope, this kind of shadowed hope, this kind of hope that often wears a dark veil, a veil of grief, of mourning, of realization of loss. But in unveiling itself, that hope often also is proving to have a very dark face under the dark veil, because so key to us here is that the darkness that gets unveiled is not just the darkness of unknowing or of some kind of ignorance. It's this other darkness that takes such endlessly embodied form racially, and it's the darkness of a mystery that never settles for mere ignorance, that is always a darkness of pseudo-Dionysius, that is the brilliant darkness, the darkness that glows. I think that's a good reason for me to go silent at about this point, and just appreciate the glowing shades of the darkness within us and around us and in the world that can help us to face the forms the forms that get called in a more crude way dark, as though dark meant evil, that lift us into a darkness in which that systemic evil can, in an ongoing way, be not just addressed, not just resisted, but actually, in some subtle and probably overly modest way, actually undone, so that the multicolors of our hope shine through the very white darkness of that evil out there. I'm glad that this conference got us back to the whore and the beast, and that it was okay to say that out loud, and that it was okay at this particular point in history. I hate to be retiring during what's his name's term, the beast, and I hope that the whore, the economy, doesn't damage the future of this school and of the schools all of you are with so much that it just lends more triumph to that pairing of political beast and world economic whore that that rides in the book of Revelation. I hope that the new Drew, I didn't say new Drew, a new Drew of New Jersey and the New Jerusalem here at Drew keeps disclosing, keeps opening, keeps this apocalypsis happening with a calypso beat, right? I love you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Take that with me.
And I'm going to be back here.
Here,